Hey everybody, Susan here with Pumpkin Hill Stampers. I've got a fun stamp and show and tell to share with you today. We're going to be using the thegang'salll Meer stamp set. This is from the Spring Celebration promotion. This is one of the free sets you can get with a $50 order. We're going to do a fun watercoloring project. Now I know watercoloring is not for everybody, but some of us love it. So I'm doing a watercolor project. I'm going to show you how I made this fun panel here with our fun meerkats. And I'll show you another sample that I put together with it as well. So let's go ahead and get started with some fun stamping. So I'm going to zoom in so that you can see what I'm doing as I work. So give me a second, let me adjust the camera. So I'm going to zoom in as close as I can, and hopefully I'll stay within my picture frame here. Okay, so this is what we're going to do, and here's my thing. Okay, so here's my stamp. And I'm going to ink that up. Now I'm using archival black, which they have retired, but it was safe for watercoloring. We do still sell the Stays On, which they recommend for watercoloring, but any watercoloring safe ink you have will work for this. And I am stamping on the watercolor paper. So I've inked up my stamp, and I'm just going to flip it over and stamp my image down. Give that a good press so the ink really transfers over to that fibrous watercolor paper. Okay, and as you can see, I mounted both stamps on one block so I could kind of line them up beforehand. So that's a little helpful too. Okay, now what I'm going to be using is my aqua painter and re-inkers. Okay, my re-inker bottles. So I'm going to bring in a large clear block. Okay, I'm going to use this as my palette of color. So, let's see. Yeah, that'll work. Okay, so first things first, I'm going to sit down so that I'm closer to my project, and we're going to start coloring. So the first thing I'm going to do is my ground color. So I am using Sahara Sand for that. Now, part of watercoloring is how much water do you use, how wet do you want it, and that kind of depends on how much control you want over your ink. So I'm going to be having some paper towel right here by the side so I can dry off my brush as need be. So I've just put a little bit of Sahara Sand down on my clear block, and I'm just using my wet tip of my aqua painter to kind of bleed that out a little bit. Okay, so now I'm going to color kind of across the bottom of this horizon, just kind of dabbing my color up between their little toes, coming across, and once I have that in, I'm pretty much able to just free brush the rest of my image. So I'm just adding, going across as I go, and if I want to come back in and add a little more shading, I can do that. The wetter the paper gets, the more the ink kind of swishes around, and after it dries, if you want to come back in and add a little more shading with a drier brush, you can do that. Okay, so there's our sand for our desert. Okay, so now I'm going to turn my block and use a new clean corner. I'm going to go ahead and do the cactus next. Now I'm using Granny Apple Green for my cactus because I think it's a nice bright color. So just a little dab of color. Now what I'm going to be careful of is that I don't touch the wet of my watercolor paper down here with my green, otherwise it'll bleed as I go. So I'm going to make my brush kind of dry. I'm going to pick up that green, I'm going to brush it out a bit. Alright, so now I'm going to add that green to my cactus. Nice pop of color in our scene. And I don't know about you, but I've been to Arizona, and of course I had to get a cactus plant to bring home, and it lived for quite a while, but it had these beautiful cactus flowers on them, and mine were pink. So I've decided to go ahead and add pink for the cactus flowers on the top of this cactus. Alright, so there's my green. And now I'm bringing in Melon Mambo. And I only need a tiny dab of that because these are tiny little flowers. And I'm going to kind of wash that out a bit. Now I want my brush really kind of dry to do these because they're very small. So almost dry brushing that ink on there for those cactus flowers. Okay, so I put the ink on my aqua painter, and then I brushed it out on my napkin here next to me, and then I almost dry brushing it into those flower petals. So it's very vivid, but also it was very dry. So now I just need to bleed out my color a little bit so I can clean out my brush. Okay, I'm going to turn my paper towel so I have a dry spot, and see my brush is pretty much clean again. Alright, I'll spin my block again. So now I'm going to do the sky. I chose Bermuda Bay, well, mostly because I was using it for the card and it was on the table, but it was a nice bright blue to use for the card. So I have Bermuda Bay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this over because I decided I wanted to paint without painting over my image. I wanted to paint to it. So I'm going to drop some water on there, really bleed out my Bermuda Bay. Okay, but now because I bleeded it out, my brush is really wet. So I'm going to dry it off on my paper towel. Okay, drier than it was. I'm going to come back and pick up some color, and then very carefully, here we'll start here, very carefully, I'm coming in between meerkats and painting that sky that's going to be all around them. Okay, now these brushes are very supple. They're easy to manipulate. The key is how much water you have in them when you're trying to use them. If you're painting a large area, you may want them wetter. If you're painting very fine detail, you probably want them drier so that you really can control where the color and the water is going. So I'm going to be real careful around the cactus because I don't want to bleed out that green or the pink from the flower, but I do want to get right up close to it. I don't really want there to be any white splotches, so I'm just dabbing my point of my painter into that space. Alright, so now I'm going to come do the sky above this, just because my hand needs a break from doing all that detail. Alright, now I'll go back to doing details. I'm going to drag my brush again. Alright, gotta do detail. Pick up some more paint. Come in between these guys. This is a nice valley of space between these two. So I'm just pulling the paint with my aqua painter kind of away from the stamped image, trying to keep them as clean as possible so that I can just add the color for them after. Okay, now I'm going to come back and do between their arms. Very delicate touch here. Dry brush. Get all this detailed space between our fun buddies here. So watercoloring can take you a while, but I find it relaxing. I don't think there's a right or wrong way to watercolor an image, and I think it takes practice, and I think, at least for me, when I get to sit down and make a watercolored project, it helps me relax, mellow out, kind of just focus on something other than everything else in my life. So it's a nice, soothing way to enjoy your stamp projects, your crafting hobby, and end up with a really nice sample piece that you can then use on your cards. So, alright, so now I can come back in with kind of a wetter brush and do the rest of the sky. And if I want to, I can come back over and add a little more shading to where it's already dried a little bit. Alright? Alright, so there's my blue sky. Alright, so now I'm cleaned off my brush. Now I have one color left. So I am using Crumb Cake for our fun little friends here. And I'm going to add my dollop of ink there. And I'm going to add some water because I want to wash it out kind of like I did with the blue. So I'm going to add some water to the block. Let that all kind of pool together. But I am going to dry that brush off so I have control. So I think I'm going to turn my image over too now. Alright, so am I still in my camera frame? Am I done do a job keeping us all on track here? Alright, so hang up my, where did I say, Crumb Cake. So I'm going to kind of start in the center of the bodies just so I can kind of test how wet my brush is. I'm just going to draw it down. Let it kind of fill in that space that doesn't have color yet. And if you find you have too much water pooling, you can always blot it. Just that simple. Right? Gain control over your image just by blotting it, but don't put your blot down and kind of spread it, just blot it and pick it straight back up again. Okay, you just want to dry the image just so you can maintain control. Alright, so you can see I'm focusing because I'm trying to stay inside the lines. I'm not talking as much, but I am nearly finished. So you just have to have patience. You have to have kind of a steady hand. You have to know when to blot your brush or blot your image. You're going to want to take your time, enjoy it. Right? There's no need in rushing. If you have to rush to make a card, then this is maybe not for you. But if you can take the time to stamp, let it dry, pick some colors, and do some watercoloring with your aqua brush, then I certainly advise it. Alright, so there are my fun meerkats. I'm just going to come back. Do a little touch-up work. Boop, boop, boop. Alright, I'm happy with that. Okay, so I'm going to scroll out here. A bigger view here. So you can see my block, my nice big block. It was my palette, right? Use my aqua brush. No problem there. So, there's that. Now, when you watercolor, your paper might curl up a little bit. Let it dry before you mount it. That's really the best advice I have, is just let it dry. And then use a nice strong adhesive, whether it's dimensionals or tear and tape. So I'm going to show you two cards that I use this panel on. Here's the first one. So just real simply, I took my panel, right, I edged it with some black cardstock. I put it on my granny apple green card. I stamped the happy birthday to a stand-up Fred on the bottom, and it's good to go. Just like that. Nice and simple. So that was one. And then here's the other one I did. This one I did do a little dry embossing with our metalled hammer plate, and I layered a piece of Granny Apple Green on the Bermuda Bay, so I'm pulling those two colors in. And this one, you notice, I stamped the party hat from the set on all their little heads. So it's a nice little party, and it says "From All of Us." I punched that out. But you can see all three of these images, they're similar, but they're different. So when you watercolor, don't expect copycats. You're not going to get copycats. Every time it's going to be a little different. How wet was my brush? How much color did I have? How careful was I? It's all going to be a little bit different, but you can make the same panel and then make multiple cards out of it. So it's kind of fun. So there is our watercolor technique for today. I'll have all the instructions over on the blog, so go visit the post if you want these written out. I'll put my supplies over there. The link to the video will be over there. So subscribe to the blog and you'll get all of my projects, not just my video projects here on YouTube. And if you're doing any fun shopping, especially now that it's still celebration, earn some free product. I'd really appreciate if you'd hop on into my online store and purchase your supplies. Your support is greatly appreciated. So thanks everybody. Leave me comments. Let me know if you're going to try some watercoloring techniques. And I'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye-bye.